nation divided. Germans turn on Germans over migrants. Is anti-refugee sentiment dragging the nation to the far right? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmakers are the protests in Chemnitz. It started with the murder of a German man, allegedly at the hands of 2 Muslim refugees. The result? Fights, fury, and rubber bullets. Over the past week, tens of thousands of far-right demonstrators have clashed with left-wing protesters in the eastern city of Chemnitz. A politician from the right-wing party Alternative for Germany suggested people take to the streets to protect themselves. 2 days later, the beating of a Syrian man triggered fears of vigilante attacks. Now, anti-immigration protests are not new to Germany, especially since the country took in more than 1 million asylum seekers in 2015. But the size and severity of the violence has revealed the depth of anger that fuels Germany's anti-refugee sentiment. How has that played into the hands of the far right? Shoaib Hassan reports.
A fatal stabbing and an outpouring of rage as Germany battles a growing divide over the status of immigrants. It all started when a local man was knifed to death after an argument turned violent in the town of Chemnitz in the east of the country. A federal employee leaked an arrest warrant which revealed the suspected attacker was an Iraqi man. Far-right supporters, many from the main opposition Alternative for Germany or AfD, took to the streets a day later. The Saxony state police were called in as counter-protests by left-wing groups led to clashes and violence. It's the latest problem plaguing Germany's federal government led by Chancellor Angela Merkel.
Es ist in der Nacht vom Samstag zum Sonntag ein Mensch umgekommen, getötet worden. Glücklicherweise sind jetzt Tatverdächtige auch schon festgenommen worden. Und das ist ein schreckliches Ereignis gewesen. Und unser Mitgefühl gilt, und mein Mitgefühl gilt natürlich auch den Angehörigen des Opfers. Zweitens, was wir danach gesehen haben, ist etwas, was im Rechtsstaat keinen Platz hat. Wir haben Videoaufnahmen darüber, dass es Hetzjagden gab, dass es Zusammenrottungen gab, dass es Hass auf der Straße gab. Und
Merkel's Christian Democrats have been under pressure from the AfD for their liberal immigration policies. That pressure has increased since the far-right group won 94 seats in elections for the Bundestag in 2017. Making it the third largest party in parliament. The AfD remains strongly anti-immigration and particularly opposes entry of those from the Arab world. It says Middle Eastern immigrants are Islamizing Germany and has called for a return to self-described traditional Christian values. AfD supporters were at the forefront of recent protests. The state has one of the highest rates of violence against immigrants in the country.
It is clear that this is not only a problem for Saxony. This is a problem for the whole of society, because the ones who came here in the past days to chase people were from the whole of Germany, and therefore this is a central task for the German government and its interior minister.
I don't know. I am afraid because there are so many right-wing Germans on the streets, so I am scared. But I hope it will all be okay. I ask the German government to bring in stricter laws so that this kind of criminality doesn't happen again.
The latest protests on Saturday took place without any violence. But the situation remains a challenge for German authorities. Have they failed to deal with the resurgent far right? And will that lead to more attacks on ethnic minorities? Shoaib Hassan, the newsmakers.
So is Germany rife with racism, or does the far right have some legitimate grievances? To discuss this, I'm joined from Berlin by Frank Hansel. He is a member of the AfD, Alternative for Germany. And from Frankfurt is human rights activist Nasir Ahmed. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Frank, let me begin with you. Are your streets, especially in Chemnitz, filled with hatred fueled by you, the AfD?
Definitely not. We should not talk about hatred, but we should talk about discontent with the Merkel government. What's happening on the street is the opposite of the feeling that this policy, the migrant policy, is a complete failure because we have a lack of inner security. We have murder attacks, not the last one in Chemnitz, but we have 24 casualties in this year with migrants, and this is what we do not accept anymore, and which the people actually want to express discontent and tell the government, well, please, this is enough.
And
it's not
certainly, okay,
unrest against the
Frank.
people and the
Frank,
migrants, but it's against the policy.
Okay, this march of mourning, to many, they see it as a wolf whistle for racism and xenophobia because they look at it cannibalizing something that might be legitimate. A man was killed and people are angry about it. But when you see people doing Nazi salutes on the streets, they think, oh, this might be about something else. Do you condemn that?
Of course, this is to be condemned, but we also know that some of those Nazi shouting was done by other people in order to delegitimize and to discredit these marches. I myself was on Saturday on the March on Sorrow, and there was absolute silence. There was no shouting at all, no scandals. This is really, the media is showing sometimes something different what's really happening. On the first day there were some really sort of riots, and this was part of the far right, but it has nothing to do with AfD. We had a silent march on the victims, and there was nothing to say negative about it actually. But the media want to put AfD as a political competitor to the other parties, into the far right, to discredit us, that people will not vote for us, and this is actually to condemn. This is to condemn, and not the real showing of discontent in manifestations.
Let's go to Frank. Nasir Ahmed, so you've listened for the past couple minutes to Frank from the AfD on the other side of the aisle here. Is there anything that Frank said that makes sense to you? Do you want to concede anything to him that the man might have a point?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here. I don't know what Frank is saying because the facts are telling us that Germany is getting better in the criminalistic statistic. The criminalistic statistic says that the criminalistic is going down in the last 10 years, yeah? And I don't know
but not murders.
What is...
Not murders.
I don't know what is to be said that it's a peaceful march. I mean, Björn Höcke is standing with a right-wing Nazi, with pro-Chemnitz leader, and you are saying that it's a peaceful march. I can't accept that.
Frank.
No.
Frank,
it was not planned that pro-Chemnitz, which is far more right than us. Of course, yes.
Right.
Please.
So you have interesting bedfellows here, as we mentioned. Frank, sorry. Allow me to address my question to you, and you can respond then. So you have these extreme far right elements. I know you don't like to consider yourself far right. You have these extreme far right elements coming in. You essentially are who your bedfellows are politically, right? You are who you keep company with. So we're seeing Nazi salutes on the street.
No, it's
we're
not
seeing
true
Nazi salutes on the street.
We're
seeing people who are expressing anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim sentiment there. At some point, you've got to stop playing this game, right? You have to say, well, these are the people that represent us.
Well, AfD, as I want to repeat again, make it clear, we are not going against migrants or against people. We are against this wrong, false policy of Mrs. Merkel and actually her politics with migration. We have, as you know, well, in 2015, there's 1 million people, a little bit more, and we have 600,000 people who came into our country without that we knew where they come from, what they want, what they're going for, and in no other country in the world this is possible. And this welcome refugee policy is a failure, and it's going to be very hard in order to turn this. And I think this peaceful protest, I'm not talking about some riots which were done by other groups, but AfD had been completely peaceful and silent. This was okay. The march was stopped from the police because the left, the extreme left, wanted to disturb this peaceful demonstration, and then afterwards there might have been some complication. But until we were in this march, there was actually no problems.
Frank?
And Pro Chemnitz is another group.
Right.
They were supposed to make another demonstration, and then they turned to us, but this was not planned, and there is no inner combination with them, and we cannot deny or not
so
allow people to take part in such a march.
Okay, Frank, these are not my words. These are Merkel's spokesman Stefan Seibert's words. You are hounding refugees. That's what you're doing. You're hounding them. A man was stabbed, yes, let the police deal with it.
Yeah.
The fact that the two suspects, and this was leaked, the two suspects happened to be allegedly from Iraq and Syria, might have nothing to do with an open doors policy. It's an incident of crime. What you're doing, according to Merkel's spokesman, is that you're hounding refugees. He's right, isn't he? That's what you're doing.
This is wrong. There was no proofs for this. Even the state attorney said this is not true. There was one camera who implied this, but actually this was not true. And it is not AfD. There are always idiots in all the countries, and there are probably some xenophobic people, but AfD is not. No, sorry.
There was an AfD member.
You have to understand where we come from. We were found in 2000.
No. Who leaked this justice certificate of this Iraqi murderer, and it was an AfD member who posted it on the Facebook. Yeah, you can't tell us that you are
was a guy from
peaceful.
the,
You are not peaceful.
No. This.
No. It's proven that an AfD member has.
One of the state Ministry of Justice published this. It was a person from the State Ministry of Justice in Saxony, because he said he cannot understand and bear what the media is saying. He, as a state agent, said, "I'm not want to close the eyes, but I want to give a public testimony of what really was in this claim of this murder." And then this was commented by some AfD members, but it was already published by the state official.
Okay, so Nasir, let me come in here. Okay, so Frank, interesting
courageous.
point.
And if I see, one sentence, and
finish it.
The left was very happy about Assange and all those people. If the left would have done it, then would have been completely different. So let's not
interesting correlation, interesting parallel that you make. Okay, fair enough. Conceded. Nasir, let me come at this from another angle, right? When we look at opinion polls, in Saxony, right, wherein the city is based, 25% of people, according to the latest polls, support the AfD. A smaller amount support others who are even further to the right. And if we look at the fact, Nasir, that within the corridors of power, we have people taking it upon themselves to actually leak this information from among the police, from among the Justice Department locally. Doesn't it tell you that there's a certain big amount of support for the AfD, or at the very least,
for sure,
a certain amount of support, at the very least, a certain amount of support in a German democracy for people who believe that this immigration system is not working and this immigration plan is not working? Would you concede that at least?
Yeah. Before this incident happened in Chemnitz, there was LKA worker, yeah? This was a very big comic thing. And after this thing, this prison officer who published this warrant, he said that I'm going to risk my work, but I want to be a hero. And then AfD member Stefan Räble from Baden-Württemberg, he said, and I will quote, "You are a hero, and just as all of my brilliant employees are heroes in the field, I need you and your expertise very well in my team." I mean, this criminal human who published this arrest warrant wants to come or is being made a hero by AfD. And you can tell me that the AfD is peacefully.
Okay.
The AfD is not
okay,
peacefully.
Frank, let me add to that. So, Frank,
just a second.
I mean,
okay, hold on.
What
hold
are
on
you talking about?
Hold on,
Sorry,
Frank,
what are you talking
Frank,
about?
Frank,
Peaceful.
Frank, hold on for a second.
Commenting on such a thing is completely
okay. So hold on for a second. Let me ask you about Marcus Frohnmayer's tweet. Marcus Frohnmayer's tweet about taking matters into our own hands because, as an AfD representative, he said that you don't trust the authorities. So we must take matters into our own hands and calling on people to take matters into their own hands. 2 days later in Wismar, 3 German men attack a 20-year-old Syrian man. That was last Wednesday night as he made his way home alone.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do
there was
you
no
not see any
nothing.
correlation between the two? And maybe even causation?
This is to be condemned. This is to be condemned, evidently. I wouldn't have put the phrases like Frohnmayer did, but he did not apply self-justice. He said that we are not going to accept this anymore. And that's something different. And now let's come back to this guy from the State's Ministry of Justice. He did because his conscience said, I have to do this because the press and what the establishment is saying is wrong. And this, I said it already before, imagine Snowden or Assange. They were heroes for the left, because they did something that they wanted to hear. We cannot afford to continue to make double standards, and we see that that the extreme left, they are using force, they are protesting contrast, they are taking stones and throw it on the police. There was nothing like that from the right or from the center-right, because I say again, AfD is the political party of political realism out of the midst of society. It's not an extreme right party, and we have a very dangerous policy which leads to a very difficult situation in inner security. We had terrorists coming. We have about 700 or 800 IS people who are ready to use violence against the German people, and this is what makes people angry.
Frank,
I'm not talking about hatred, because
so
I reject hatred. I don't want this concept.
Okay, last year there were 1,713 attacks against migrants in Germany. Against migrants. Did you march for them?
Yeah, shouldn't be. Should not be.
Would you march
Shouldn't
for
happen.
them?
You have to.
As I say,
Would you
our
march for
policy
them?
from AfD is we demonstrate, of course. Yeah.
There was no demonstration against them. No,
condemn that.
or for them. There was no against. You can't just speak words and
because
you have to show them.
Sorry, no, please. Well, make it. Nobody was killed. No foreigner, no migrant was killed by a German. Okay.
Oh my God.
This you have to accept as a fact. 24 people were killed in Germany from migrants. Yes.
193.
This does not legitimize violence from people.
There were 193 killings from right-wing people.
Frank, let me just try to...
Nothing to do with AfD. I'm sorry. This is another
Frank, let me just try and understand something as we wrap up. Right?
And I condemn that. It must not happen.
I'm gonna get Nasir to close us off, but before that, let me just pose this to you so I get absolute clarity. Are you convinced that the media is rigged against you, the government is rigged against you, and biased in favor of the left? Is that where you stand?
That's what is evident, unfortunately.
Nasir Ahmed.
This made AfD also rise.
Okay, so Nasir Ahmed, everything's rigged in your favor, rigged in the direction of the refugees and migrants, the government's on your side, so what's your problem? Why bother? Why worry about anything?
No. The problem is that the media and the journalists and the AfD on the forefront is demonizing Muslims and refugees. And the correlation between those 1,300 attacks to the immigrants and the AfD demonizing is a correlation. There is a connection in between.
No killing. No killing.
And the thing is that Bundeskanzlerin Frau Angela Merkel said, we can do it. But then AfD came and said, we'll destroy it. And they found fellow beings, fellow fighters from other parties as well, like Seehofer from FDP and so on. And you can break things up more easily than building them up. This is the thing. And the AfD has done nothing yet but to split the society in two groups, left and right. But there is no left. We are Democrats. On the left side, there is no left. They are Democrats. They are law-abiding people who are marching against
the Greens, the Communist Linke Party, the Social Democrats. It's one left bloc, and it's only problem that they see that there is a new political force, which is
the
third, and then in the East we are going to be even the second largest force. That's why they're afraid. They use all the political power they have, all media power, in order to get us out of this, and they blame us to be not part of the democratic system. This is a complete, complete part of an oppression.
Okay.
And the problem is that
Okay, let that be the final word from you, Frank.
And they will not vote for us.
Briefly, final 20 seconds to you, Nasir. Frank feels he's being oppressed. Go ahead, Nasir. Finish this conversation for us.
I, as a Muslim, I can say that when Muslims become violent, they are called Islamists, terrorists, extremists, and you name it. But when a Nazi gets violent, which we saw in Chemnitz, migrants are hunted, journalists were beaten. Gauland says it's normal when people get angry.
Nobody was killed, nobody was hunted.
Just a second.
Just a second. No, nobody was killed. There was not personal force.
It's peaceful.
Demo. That's not true.
Gauland says one is allowed
there's
to
no
demonstrate
relation.
angrily. No, Gauland says in the indirect way that it's normal for people to hunt migrants. It's normal for people to show Hitler greetings. It's normal for people to become Nazis.
Okay? I'm sorry.
It's normal for people to want overthrow.
That's bullshit.
Yeah.
Okay,
no,
gentlemen. I've got to wrap. I've got to move on.
Forget this.
Gentlemen.
It's beyond.
Okay, gentlemen.
It's beyond serious discussion.
Okay, well, I think we've had a serious discussion here and an important one. And I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Frank Christian Hansel and Nasir Ahmed, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead on the program, a Catholic cover-up. Pope Francis is accused of hiding the abuse of a cardinal. Should he be forced to resign? And American hero or a warmonger? John McCain is laid to rest. But how should the former presidential candidate be remembered? When Pope Francis became the head of the Roman Catholic Church, many hoped it would remove the taint of scandal that had plagued the Vatican for decades. But instead, it seems the reformist Pope has found himself caught up in a scandal of his own. In a staggering letter by a former archbishop, Pope Francis has been accused of hiding the abuse of former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. The revelation came right in the middle of the pontiff's visit to Ireland, a nation steeped in Catholicism. So, is Pope Francis faltering in his service to his flock, or is there a concerted push to bring him down? Natalie Pahernan reports.
It was the first papal visit to Ireland in almost 40 years. Hundreds of thousands of the faithful came to see Pope Francis. But the head of the Roman Catholic Church also drew demonstrations by survivors of clerical and institutional abuse and their supporters. They have demanded criminal investigations into abuse accusations that go back decades. Pope Francis asked for forgiveness for the abuse, including sexual abuse of children by members of the Church in Ireland. He said he shared the shame and pain of the Church authorities' failure to deal with the scandal. But while Francis toured Ireland, he was coming under attack from inside the institution he heads. Former Vatican official Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano said the Pope had failed to act on abuse allegations against former American Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Vigano, an open critic of the Pope, wrote an 11-page letter saying Francis knew from at least 2013 that McCarrick was a serial predator. Pope Francis must be the first to set a good example for cardinals and bishops who covered up McCarrick's abuses and resign along with all of them. Here's the Pope's response to that call.
Io ho letto questa mattina quel comunicato. Ho letto E io dirò sinceramente che devo dirvi questo, a lei e a tutti coloro di voi che sono interessati. Leggete voi attentamente il comunicato e fate voi il vostro giudizio. Io non dirò una parola su questo.
The Archbishop's attack on the Pope is an insight into the divisions in the church hierarchy. But it's not the first time Pope Francis has faced criticism. The Pope has come under fire by conservative Roman Catholics for his outreach to some in the LGBT community. He's also been labelled as a reformist for emphasising social welfare outreach, unlike his predecessors who often focused on doctrine. But Pope Francis is the head of the Roman Catholic Church. And from that pulpit, he is in the position to shape the Church and its interactions with members and clergy around the world. How he deals with this latest criticism will show how he's wielding that influence. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Mary Rice Hassan. She's the director of the Catholic Women's Forum, an organization that aims to amplify the role of women within the church. And in London, we have Jack Valero. He's the founder of Catholic Voices, a project that aims to improve the church's representation in the media. I thank you both for joining us. Jack, let's begin with you. Let's, I guess, forget the spiritual dimension for a moment. Forget infallibility. Let's render unto Caesar, I guess, and look at the Pope just as a head of state, right? And the scale of the scandal and the allegations being made and what has been said and what he's been accused of. Don't you think that's worthy of resignation?
Well, the letter by Archbishop Vigano makes allegations against 32 people, and some of those will have to be followed up. About Pope Francis, he says a very simple thing, that he told him about McCarrick in June 2013, and that Benedict had imposed sanctions of McCarrick, which Francis lifted and put him back into circulation. Well, that has been proven to be false. And that's really the only thing he says about Francis, because there were no sanctions or no public sanctions. McCarrick had a public life throughout the pontificate of Benedict, and really nothing changed when Francis came along. So the questions are not what Francis did or didn't do about McCarrick, but what did John Paul know when he made him an archbishop and a cardinal? What did Benedict know when he didn't act against them? And I have found, looking at this letter that came out 8 days ago, it has been really a distraction. It has made Catholics fight each other when we really should be united to fight the cancer of child abuse.
Okay.
Another question is whether Pope Francis has been effective in fighting child abuse. That's something to be discussed. But really, the Vigano letter has really not helped at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Vigano's letter came out while Pope Francis was in Ireland, a country, I guess you could say, wrestling with its Catholicism in many ways, with modernity and with faith. Mary Rice Hassan, should the Pope resign?
I'm not going to speak to whether the Pope should resign or not. The presumption is he's our Holy Father, he's our Pope, but what we do want is answers. And women want answers in particular. And I think in the United States, this issue is not going to go away. So I would disagree respectfully with what Jack had said just now, that it has been established that Pope Benedict did not put public sanctions on then Cardinal McCarrick. What we don't know, what we do know is that there were some kind of sanctions or some sort of restrictions, and that former Cardinal McCarrick felt free to disregard those. But more importantly, the questions that have been put to our Holy Father are questions that he needs to answer, because his flock is anguished. People are anguished and hurt and betrayed here. And the Holy Father has a pastor's heart. He needs to answer these questions directly.
Okay, so Jack, are we seeing Vatican House of Cards at play here, piggybacking on what is a very serious thing?
So.
Child sex abuse, but power politics being at play.
I think child sex abuse is a very important topic. We must tackle it. We must tackle it properly. I just don't think that this letter has helped. We need to investigate the McCarrick affair. The McCarrick affair needs to be investigated in the year 2000 with John Paul, in the year 2004, 2005, 2006 with Benedict. It doesn't need to be investigated now. The problem was before. But more importantly, if you look at the Pennsylvania report, which came out just before and was horrific, this needs to be investigated further. And this needs to be, you know, people who were implicated in these things need to be found, right, and punished, and victims need to be recompensed. This is the real work that needs to go on. And of course, anybody who was implicated in this scandal needs to be punished or whatever. But I just think that this particular letter has not helped in this process.
Okay, so Mary Rice Hassan, looking at the politics, Vigano seems to be one of those, I guess, I mean, I struggle with the terms here, but more conservative than the Pope, Catholics, who might consider him a little bit too liberal. Vigano has spoken about gays within the church, blames them for child abuse, talks of a homosexual current. There's an idea that there are those who consider that the Pope too liberal, who are using this to try and get rid of the Pope. They were people who kept quiet when there were allegations over Pope Benedict and covering up child sex abuse scandals in Germany and the US and elsewhere. And now suddenly they care about child sex abuse because it's a good opportunity to get rid of Pope Francis. Does that check out?
No, I disagree. And so here's the thing. We don't know. Certainly there were problems under past popes because these problems are long-standing. But when you are the leader, as the Holy Father is the leader, you're the leader today. And these allegations have been made against him personally. And I don't see this as a source of division. There are people from both the right and the left who are calling for the same thing, who are just humbly asking the Holy Father, please tell us. Because the allegation, the most serious allegation to my mind, made by Archbishop Vigano, is that our Holy Father knew about Cardinal McCarrick's past, or former Cardinal McCarrick's past, and yet still allowed him to be the spokesman and to be out front and center and to be advising. And so if that's the case, we need to hear that from the Holy Father. And we need to hear the apology that goes with that, or the explanation if it's more complex. But what's not acceptable, what is not speaking to the heart of the anguish of Catholics here in the US, it's not speaking to us to say, I won't say a word.
Right.
And so that was particularly hurtful.
Yeah, Jack, why is he keeping his counsel? Why doesn't he give an adequate explanation? Why doesn't he say Vigano's talking nonsense and there's no proof that I knew, here's why? Why not?
Well, I think he's following the same policy as Benedict before him. So he saw that John Paul had done nothing about him, that Benedict had done nothing. He didn't want to throw them under the bus. So he continued. He didn't make any change or re-establish McCarrick at the center. This is false. He just continued the same with whatever was known. As soon as it was known that he had been involved in child abuse, he was punished publicly. The only person who's sanctioned McCarrick is really Francis. It's not Benedict. It's not John Paul. And but really, this is important, of course, and we must have answers. I agree with Mary. But what is really important, more important than that, is to overcome this cancer of child abuse, whether it is some aspect of homosexuality.
But that's true. The Pope himself says that. But Jack, certainly, the Pope himself says that. I mean, in response to the Pennsylvania grand jury report, he said all the right things, didn't he? He said all members of God's people need to help to uproot the culture of abuse. Everyone of the baptized must feel involved in the ecclesial and social change. Exactly. He said that shame and repentance, was necessary, and it was not where it should have been. They didn't act in a timely manner. We showed no care for the little ones. We abandoned them. All of that is what you're saying. He's shown that sense of contrition as a leader. But the point is, someone who's very senior, this is not a small fry, someone who's very senior, who was very close to him, has said that he knew all along. That's what he's not addressing. That's the point.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's not reliable. That is not reliable.
Well, except, Jack, we need to hear that from the Holy Father, because he is the one who knows what Archbishop Vigano said to him, and it's not right to say that the Holy Father changed nothing, because we have the reports even of David Gibson and other reporters who noted that that then Cardinal McCarrick had been, quote, put out to pasture under Pope Benedict, as if he had been sidelined, and that Pope Francis had brought him back and that was using him as a spokesman. And so that brings to light the question of, what did Francis know? And if he made that decision, why did he make that? And so the people here, especially in the United States, I wonder if in Europe the pain and the hurt of people here in the US is being underestimated. People here in the US need to hear the Pope look us in the eye and tell us with that great pastor's heart what we are to understand about what happened and what's going to change and what mistakes were made under him and perhaps by previous popes. But we need to hear that from him, because he is our leader. He is the one we must trust.
Good.
And it creates a climate of distrust.
Okay, Jack?
No, okay, we need to hear, but he wasn't put out to pasture during Benedict. He was extremely active all over America, and he was feted by Vigano himself, by Benedict. So he was very much at the center of life. To say that he was sidelined and then he was brought back into the center just doesn't fit the facts. So we need to hear. But the scandal of the seminaries, which has come out now, which hadn't come out before, because it hadn't come out into the public, which now has exploded, not just there, but in Boston, in Honduras, in Chile, needs to be tackled, and that will be tackled throughout the church, and that is being looked at. But to say, because the Pope knew something in 2013 and he behaved exactly the same as Benedict, why we're getting distracted with this when he has shown that he wants to solve this problem of child abuse. And of course, this is a new problem that we find now with McCarrick, which is the abuse of seminarians. And we need to tackle that. But why are we getting distracted here when really this problem comes from before and we are looking into it? And we are requesting all the information all around the world in all the seminaries that went around. And with McCarrick, when it came out, we did ask for the information, and we're waiting for it.
Very finely, Mary, because we're out of time. In less than 30 seconds, please.
No, so here's the thing. This is not something that Pope Francis has had no hand in, because we see also a track record, unfortunately, over the past year and a half of him being skeptical of claims of sexual misconduct on the part of bishops. And so with this direct accusation made by Archbishop Vigano, we need, in order to have confidence in the church going forward, in order to have confidence in his leadership, we need Pope Francis to provide answers. And that's why we wrote that letter. Women want answers, to hear the pain of those who are suffering under this confusion. We need his leadership. We need his answers now.
Okay, lots of questions, very few answers for the moment, and that's why we're having discussions such as this one. Mary Rice Hassan and Jack Valero, I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
The America of John McCain is the America of the Revolution. Fighters with no stomach for the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot, making the world anew with the bells of liberty. The America of John McCain is the America of Abraham Lincoln.
That was John McCain's daughter speaking at a service remembering her father after the former presidential candidate died last week. And she wasn't the only one to give McCain a glowing tribute. George Bush, Barack Obama, and Bernie Sanders are just some of the political heavyweights who praised the late Republican senator. But others haven't been so complimentary. In fact, many accuse McCain of being a warmongering racist who paved the way for a Trump White House. So how should he be remembered? Well, to discuss this, we're joined in the studio by Matthew Breiser. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. In Washington, D.C., we have Lawrence Korb. He's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense and served with John McCain in the U.S. Navy. And completing our panel from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, is Owen Higgins. He's a freelance journalist and writer. Matthew Breiser, let me start with you. How should we remember McCain? Give it to me simply.
A fighter, somebody who didn't suffer fools well, who was strongly opinionated, and his opinions focused on fighting for the little guy, the forgotten man and woman, the small countries that he felt were being abused by the larger ones, being disrespected, and he should be remembered as somebody who learned those lessons in the hardest way possible, risking his life, suffering for 5.5 years in prison and under torture.
Mm-hmm. Owen Higgins, is that the John McCain you remember?
No, I think that is a pretty rosy picture of McCain, but one that does not line up with reality. John McCain was a strong Republican who supported the destruction of the public safety net, tax breaks for billionaires, and never met a war on foreign soil that he did not want the U.S. to become involved with, and did not find the suffering of people in these wars to be really that big of a deal. And I really have to push back, especially on that idea that he was somehow in favor of the little guy when he, in his last year in the Senate, he could have done something about the Saudi Arabian war on Yemen and refused to. And I think that's pretty obviously choosing the stronger in over the week.
Okay, so Larry Korb, opinions differ on John McCain. You served with him in the Navy. Where do you stand?
Well, I think personally, he always put country ahead of himself. Now, one can argue about specific policies, but I think the key thing that always impressed me about him was after he was captured, the Vietnamese, when they recognized that his father was the admiral actually in charge of the war, offered to let him out early. And he refused to do that because the code of conduct for military people and Navy people is, first in, first out. And he knew that they would use that for propaganda purposes. So he said no, knowing that they would actually increase their torture of him. They tortured him, they put him in solitary confinement for 2 years. And then he got out when the war ended. To me, that was putting country above the individual, which many, people do not. And you go along, you take a look at the position. For example, when I was in government and he was in the Congress, he opposed us getting involved in Lebanon, and it turned out he was correct. And his position on wars, like for example Vietnam, if you're going to do it right. He supported the war in Iraq, which I did not. But what he said, if you're going to do it, make sure you have enough troops to do it, which is different. The Bush administration tried to do it basically on the cheap, and eventually, they had a surge. And he changed his mind on positions over the years. I had a big debate with him when President Clinton tried to open the military to the gays, and he was opposed to it. And I testified, but eventually he did change his mind on it. So he did show that he was malleable, on a lot of these issues. Was he perfect? No. Obviously, if you're a Republican, you may like him more than a Democrat, particularly on many domestic or social issues.
Okay, but many Republicans, especially hardline Trump supporters, don't like him at all. And that's one of the fascinating things about him. That's why a lot of people call him a maverick. Matthew Breiser, is it possible to say, okay, he's 5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. They tortured him. They did terrible things to him. That deserves a lot of respect. That's commendable. But beyond that, we can still also say the man was a hawk. He supported the Iraq War. He was keen on preemptive strikes, what's called humanitarian intervention. That doesn't mean that he wasn't somebody who deserved respect for what happened in Vietnam and so forth, but he was probably as hawkish as they come in foreign policy.
Well, he was very hawkish, and that gets back to what I was referring to when I talked about the little guy. I wasn't necessarily referring to domestic politics, though, by the way, he did cast the deciding vote against President Trump's attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which was a pretty powerful step that should have helped people, more common people. But I was referring to his engagement, his fight for smaller countries, for countries where democracy was under threat by coups, whether it's in Fiji or where a minority is being persecuted like the Rohingya in Myanmar.
And fair enough, but then the 2017 congressional bill, what Owen was talking about, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, that was essentially drafted in order to stop the U.S. supplying the Saudis with arms in bombing Yemen.
Right. You're right. He's no saint, right? And
Saudis are not the little guy, are they?
Saudis are not the little guy, and we know in this case that the bomb that was dropped on the horrible bombing of the school bus was an American-made bomb, yeah. But no, Saudis are not the little guy. But you know, there were many facets to his view on national security, and you know, this is about a proxy war, really, between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Owen Higgins, he was seen as a reasonable Republican by many on the left, and seen as a maverick Republican by many on the right. Many couldn't make their minds up about him. Do you think that ultimately here was a man who was complicated, and there was some good and there was some bad? Perhaps you just see a bit more bad than the good?
Well, I think everybody has a nuanced facets to their personality. As far as John McCain as a person, I can't actually speak to that. But what I can say is that as a public figure, I think that we should remember him as he was, especially with his funeral being such a political event. And I really can't look at his record in Congress and see anything that really reflects what your other guests are saying. You know, he was a pretty staunch Republican. The idea that he was a maverick really seems like it's kind of a media-created version of events that doesn't really line up with reality. I'll give you an example. Yes, he did cast the deciding vote against the ACA after, it should be said, making sure that all the reporters were watching. But then a few weeks later, he voted for the Bush tax cuts, or the Trump tax cuts, which essentially destroyed the ACA by getting rid of the mandate. So although he did cast that one dramatic vote against destroying the ACA in whole, he when it came to policy for the tax cut, he did basically the same thing, and it didn't get the same amount of attention, which I think it really should have.
So Larry Korb, setting aside everything he did as a senator, let's look at him for a moment as presidential candidate when he was running against Barack Obama. A lot of people feel, well, he lost, so ultimately it was the wrong decision to choose Sarah Palin as his running mate. But to take that a step further, there are those who say, you know, when he chose Sarah Palin as his running mate, he actually then triggered something or started something that metastasized into the Trump phenomenon. Is that fair?
Well, I think there's no doubt about it that that was a big mistake, and I think he recognized that. As he said in his books, he wanted to choose Joe Lieberman, the former senator from Connecticut, but was talked into selecting Sarah Palin because of the fact he needed to galvanize his campaign. I don't think anybody realized when she was selected, you know, her deep, you know, positions on a lot of these issues. And that's why, you know, several people have said to me, well, why wasn't she invited to the funeral? I think that's one of the reasons. But again, if you go back and you take a look, for example, he worked with Teddy Kennedy on immigration reform. He worked with Russ Feingold, a very liberal from Wisconsin, on campaign finance reform. So he did work across the aisle on a lot of issues, more than a lot of people, unfortunately, now are doing. But I think you're right. Inadvertently, I think by picking Sarah Palin, he laid the groundwork for what we've seen with President Trump.
Matthew Breiser, Sarah Palin, the Tea Party, the years tumble along. Something new creates a new political reality, a new political tone. Did McCain play a part in that by choosing Sarah Palin?
He certainly played a part in it, but yeah, and she was a choice that at the time many people complained had not really been vetted. That's what Mr. Korb is essentially saying right now as well. But the Tea Party, Trumpism, these are political forces that are much bigger than John McCain or Donald Trump. I think that the passing of John McCain is the passing of a different political era in the United States. When, yes, there was the Tea Party, there was this growing populism in American politics, but he was not part of the populist wave. He was part of an era of more bipartisanship, civility. Yes, even though he was a staunch Republican, you look at who attended his funeral, and it was a bipartisan showing, including, you know, the two presidents who beat him in presidential elections.
Right. Owen Higgins, Matthew Breiser used the word civility. Would you concede that McCain perhaps represented a more civil time?
Well, I'm not sure if that's accurate. McCain used a lot of language that I don't think that I can use here, referring to his wife by using a pretty horrible slur. He referred to Asians in general using a racial slur in 2000.
Although he said he was only he said he was only talking about his captors then when he was asked to explain that, right? I mean, just adding a qualification to that. Yes.
But does that excuse it?
No, absolutely not. But just adding it to it. Yeah.
And you know, as far as McCain, you know, representing this kind of civility, I mean, does it really change things if we're just talking about the same policies in a polite way? I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think that is a healthy or productive way to look at public policy when it's being developed in the most powerful country in the world, whether or not it's directed at a domestic or a foreign audience. Whether you're polite or not, what you're doing is going to have major effects on people's lives. And I think somebody like McCain, who voted against sanctions on apartheid South Africa 6 times, who voted against the creation of the Martin Luther King Day, who voted against the Civil Rights Bill of 1990, who supported the Papers, Please Act in Arizona in 2010. I think the fact that he was more polite than Trump when he was pursuing these policies, I don't know if that really matters in the end.
Okay, very finally, Larry Korb, does he look better posthumously just because Trump is so unpalatable and just so rude?
Well, I think he looks better because he was one of the first Republicans to stand up to Trump. Remember, he pulled his endorsement of Trump before the election. And since he's, you know, in his last year of his life, he stood up to Trump when a lot of people in the party won't. In fact, I think one of the worst things about that ceremony was all the people who came there and listened to what his daughter and other people said about Trump, and they still support him. And so I think, you know, he really did do that. He stood up to him, and he has admitted his mistakes. As our colleague up in Massachusetts talking about, yes, he did a lot of these things, like, for example, voting against the Dr. King holiday. But then he said he was wrong. And I think that's what we don't have. Look, people are going to make mistakes, but are they going to come back and say, you know, I did make a mistake. I was wrong. And let me tell you, I've changed my mind. And that's what I think people admire so much about him, that he eventually did say, yeah, I did the wrong thing, but I did the right thing. And remember in the 2008 campaign, when everybody was saying Obama wasn't a citizen, you know, he was the one who said, no, he's a great American. I mean, that hurt him in the election. And in the 2000 campaign, when Bush claimed that the daughter they adopted from Bangladesh was an illegitimate child, you know, he still was able to get over that, you know, I mean, so I think in the final analysis, he's much more right than the wrongs that he did.
Okay, contested legacy. It's been really fascinating getting the different perspectives from all of you. We're out of time, but I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Matthew Breiser, Larry Korb, and Owen Higgins. Thanks again. And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, China looks to boost its investments in Africa. We ask whether Beijing has ulterior motives. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.